Today's guest is quite special. We met in a mastermind group, and he and I share similar investment objective with our short-term rental portfolio. When the guest was introducing himself, talk about his background in this group, I thought, man, this guy is pretty cool. Our guest is Tony Cappaert. His background wasn't in real estate. He went to MIT, then later co-founded Contactually. When he sold the company, he went on and got into real estate. At the time of us recording this episode, he owns 12 short term rentals with his investors, and he's generating 20 to 30% cash on cash return annually. That is very impressive. I'm sure you'll find tons of value listening to this conversation between Tony and I. And by the way, we have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review and share it with others. We want to help as many people as possible. Now, let's get to the intro. Hey ballers, welcome to episode 114. With me is Tony Cappaert from the DC area. Hey Tony, thanks for being here today on this the Real Estate Ballers show. How are you?
I'm doing well, B. Thanks for having me.
You know, it's such an honor that I got to meet you. We are in a small mastermind together. So I'm very excited to have you on the show. What are you working on today?
Yeah, well, first of all, again, thanks for having me. I'm excited to join as well. As you know, I'm relatively new to the sort of the property management world, so I'm eager to sort of learn and share what I've been doing. So just by quick background, so my world has been software for the longest time. Built and sold a venture-backed software company, and after doing so, bought a little cabin with my wife and I, and we started using it and renting it. And when we weren't using it, obviously we were renting it, and it was booked all the time. So I maybe naively thought, oh well, we've got one cabin, why don't we buy a whole bunch more? And so put together a small fund where we buy properties like cabins and cottages within a couple hours of DC where I live. We rent them out, and especially during COVID, that's been doing exceptionally well. So at this point, we've got 12 of them that we've purchased in the past 5 months, and looking to continue to grow the portfolio and sort of build this little getaway concept within the DC market. So far, so good.
That's amazing. You got a little bit ahead of me. That was going to be my next question, but that's just fine. We're going to
No, yeah,
get right into it, right?
Yeah.
So are you from DC?
I live in DC. I don't think anyone's really from DC. I grew up in very rural Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, and went to school in Boston, lived in Seattle for a while, and wound up here. But I've been here for about 10 years now.
Okay. I did, before the show, I was doing a little bit stalking, you online just to.
Uh-oh.
So you went to MIT.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So take us back to right now. I know you're doing really good with your cottages and that, but take us back to Tony before this new venture.
Yeah, well, look, so if we go back to MIT, I think like a lot of MIT folks, like pretty sort of nerdy and decently analytical and like to solve problems and whatnot. So I'd always, since high school, I've been like really entrepreneurial, and I love like the hustle of like trying to figure out how to like sell. I just love it. And I'd sold things like back in the day you could like buy ringtones for your cell phone. So I would sell those on eBay. I sold like letters from Santa. I sold like bootleg DVDs. I sold all kinds of random stuff as like a kid, and then went to school and sort of took that with me and was just really into like the startup world. So MIT has like what used to be like the 50K business plan competition. Now it's 100K, but these are business plan competitions. So, I think at the time more of a entrepreneur, like loved the idea of starting like a venture-backed company. And I got very plugged into that local community of other students and, grad students and MBAs who were also interested in that. But I sort of put that on the side to some degree, went and left undergrad and worked at Microsoft for a couple of years as a product manager. And that was a great experience for in many ways. Probably the biggest of which is just to see how software is built in a very, very big, very admittedly slow company. What are the good and bad things about that? But I think through that process, I realized two things. One, I really wanted to work in a much smaller environment where I felt like I wouldn't just be like a cog in a bigger machine. And two, like I really missed, this idea of building something, like of starting something new. So left Microsoft
How long were you at Microsoft?
just like 2.5 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Which at the time, like when you're 22, that feels like forever. But in
Right.
hindsight, it's
Yeah.
like in 2 years, that was like nothing.
That's a
Uh,
lifetime. Yeah.
but yeah, so I was there for 2 years, left and moved to DC with my girlfriend at the time, now wife, Kate. I did a nonprofit fellowship for a year. So that was like hey, I want to do something a lot smaller, maybe, feel like I'm more engaged with with my career. And ultimately in that process, met my eventual co-founder, Zvi, started Contactually, our software company, and went from there. So yeah, kind of a zigzaggy path to Contactually, and then even more of a zigzag path since then to like investments, real estate, and property and whatnot. But anyway, I'll pause there. That was where I spent the better part of my career, was building Contactually.
Tell us a little bit about Contactually.
Yeah, so eventually Contactually was a CRM product that helped realtors better engage their sphere as a means of getting more referral business. So if you ask your typical realtor, where do they get the majority of their business?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much everybody says, it's from people they know, right? So they're
Mm-hmm.
past clients, or it's, other, lenders or professional relationships of people who might refer buyers and sellers to a real estate agent. But then when you follow up with that agent and ask, well, what do you do proactively
Right.
to get more of that business? You get all kinds of answers, right? And the big takeaway is most agents are not very systematic about engaging their sphere, engaging the people they know, to try to drive more referrals. And that's what our product did. It gave them a system, it gave them software to figure out who they should speak with, when, and what they should say as a means of generating that referral business. So we built Contactually from 2011 to 2019. And originally we sold to lots of individuals of all types of industries, doubled down on the real estate industry, really focused on that customer base. And then ultimately moved up market, right? We sold to large brokerages and ultimately decided to sell the business to one of our big customers, Compass. They're the biggest independent brokerage in the US. And so got to see that whole arc from, the three of us that started the company to, we're about 75, 80 people when we sold. And exciting trip. But also in that process, got to know real estate really well because that was our customer base. So that was my foray and introduction to the industry.
So did you actually write the codes and all?
No, so I was the non-developer of the three of us. So while I was a product manager at Microsoft and maybe decently technical, I'm not a developer. So I was like the business guy. I did all of our initial sales, marketing, support, eventually built teams and scaled those teams. So now I was the non-tech guy.
Wow, that's amazing. So went from a big company, Microsoft, to creating your own venture and journey. That's very
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah. It was great. I feel so lucky and blessed that things worked out the way they did. Especially, we didn't touch on this, but my two other co-founders who we started the business with, I randomly met them. Like we didn't have like a long history working together, or we didn't go to school together. I literally reached out to Zvi, one of my co-founders, on Quora, like just a cold email basically.
Yeah.
And it just, again, I just feel very lucky that we not only were at similar stages in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
but really complemented each other well and really had a very similar philosophy and similar values, and it worked out really well.
Were y'all in the same city?
Yeah, so we were all in DC, which is why
Okay.
it worked. But yeah, it was random.
So at that point in your career, did you dabble into real estate at all?
No, I knew nothing about real estate, and frankly, I think was a little intimidated by it. Like, I think the idea, everyone I think hears about people who fix and flip homes, or I think real estate is like a sort of a sexy investment category that people talk
Uh-huh.
about, but I knew
Uh-huh.
like nothing about it. But I think just again, given that I had worked with literally thousands and thousands of agents and had gotten to know the industry really well, I got very comfortable with it. And I frankly have, bought a few homes personally and, sold our condo, bought the cabin. So I got comfortable and ultimately, once we bought that first cabin that I sort of referred to earlier, once we sold Contactually and I started renting it, that's when I think my eyes opened to, okay, maybe there's something here. There's a potentially an investment model here where, we could buy other properties that could be cash flowing very quickly through, short-term rentals. And that would be a path, I think a fairly conservative path to
Hmm.
growth, to growing revenue, right? Fix and flip. I think it's some, I'm still never done that. And I think that's be a less conservative approach. You're sort of banking on the fact that you can turn this around. And I just don't have those like contractor relationships, but I felt very good that I could operate a cash flowing property. And so that was the path I went down.
Yeah, it's different business model because I came from the fix and flip background,
Yeah.
and it's something addicting about whenever you buy a deal, right? And then you do it, you rehab it and then you resell, and then something about when that money that you get from resale hit
Yeah.
the bank,
It feels good. Yeah.
it
No,
feels
yeah.
good.
The way you articulate that, I think that's telling, right? Like it's the people who are like really all about the sale, right?
Mm,
All about the sales process and the hunt. I think the fix and flip concept makes sense because the hold period is so short. Whereas in my world today, we're buying properties, so I'm still on the hunt, right?
mhm,
I'm still negotiating, I'm still trying to get great deals,
mhm.
but I actually am less concerned about getting a really great deal, and I'm much more concerned about a deal that will cash flow for 5, 10 plus years, right? And so I'm actually, frankly, one of the reasons why we have this little secondary house bubble, because I'm willing to pay a little more upfront, knowing that I can cash flow this thing for a long time.
Well, and we love people like you. Like, I wholesale some of my deals too, and I love people like you because you guys pay a little bit more, right?
Yeah, exactly. It is like it's crazy. I could talk about this forever, but the market right now is so frothy in these secondary rural markets because, well, for many reasons, but the biggest of which people are all trapped at home and they can't go anywhere, can't fly anywhere. And the idea of having a second home in the woods has become super appealing. So we can dig more of the details of how I've been able to sort of win in that space, but it is incredibly competitive right now.
Yeah, for now, I'm real interested about that journey of like when you sold Contactual, and did you go, well, I'm just gonna retire, or did you just take a break and say, I'm gonna figure out what I'm gonna do next?
Yeah, so I've been also fortunate in that I've got a lot of other software friends who have sold their businesses, and some people have truly sold their businesses for what I would call like FU money, right? Like they don't have to work again. I was talking to a friend the other day thinking I don't have any close friends who are billionaires, but I have several billionaire, like they weren't born billionaires, but they're billionaires who I could call if I needed to, right? And that's just like a weird quirk of the software startup world that is really, it's just really weird and different. But so those are the folks that I think have like FU money. I don't have FU money, right? So the idea of me retiring, it's like, could I do it? I suppose, but I a financially, I probably wouldn't want to do it. But B, I'm just someone who I don't know. I'm not motivated by money. I never really have been. I'm really motivated by feeling like what I'm doing is interesting and it's like intellectually engaging, and I
Yeah.
feel like it's valuable to the world, to myself, and that's what gets me motivated. So when we sold Contactually, a part of me was like, it's a little bit of like, it's a breath. It's like, okay, you can rest. Like there's no longer
You probably
the
were
fates and
working like what,
livelihoods.
hundreds of hours a week?
No, no, no. So first of all, I this is a whole nother riff. I don't subscribe to this idea that you have to like kill yourself to be successful. Like I haven't done
Oh,
that in years. But there is a feeling that when dozens and dozens of people, their salaries, their livelihoods are dependent on your ability to steer the ship and keep the business going.
mm,
There is pressure there, and I
yeah,
think when you sell your business and that pressure is no longer there,
yeah.
I don't know that I recognized how much pressure that was, but it felt great to not have that on my shoulders anymore. But I quickly realized that, yeah, I wanted to challenge again, right? I wanted to figure out something new and I wanted to explore. And I think a lot of it for me is just curiosity and this desire to learn that motivates me to like push myself to figure out something that I don't know again and to start from scratch. And again, that's where a lot of this real estate interest came from.
That's cool. So you mentioned that you bought the cabin just like out on the whim, right? Decided to buy
Yeah.
one, a place
Yep.
that you can, a second home.
Yep.
Was it your second your investment home?
So we had a condo in DC that we were renting. So I think it was our third home. But yeah, we bought it with the idea that this is going to be a place we'll go away with our kids and we'll enjoy it, maybe a couple times a month. And then I felt guilty not using it when we weren't there, like not it just sitting idle. So I thought, why don't we try to rent it too? Like that was as far as I went with that thought.
Okay. So I think that's how most of us got involved into what we do now is we just accidentally discover that we could make more money.
Yeah,
Would
exactly.
that be true?
Yes, exactly.
So tell us about what you're doing today. I mean, that's all the tech world and everything, and now you're in real estate. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. This episode is brought to you by Buzz Vacation Rentals, a premier property management company in Houston and Galveston area. Give Buzz a call at 281-549-8432 to learn more about their rent guarantee program, or check out their website at listwithbuzz.com. Now, back to the Real Estate Baller Show.
Yeah, so well, I think it connects to that last point we were just talking about. I had this cabin, and it's in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, so about an hour and a half, 2 hours from DC. And I was like, well, why don't I just put this thing on Airbnb and just see how it goes? Like, I'm sure there are other people like me who want to get away. This was back in 2019, and people started to book. And of course, in hindsight, like there's all kinds of mistakes I was making. Very much underpriced it. Didn't really know how to market it effectively. Didn't have great photos, but it was despite all of that, still getting booked pretty regularly, and I felt doing well. And so I got really intrigued by like the challenge of how do I optimize this revenue? Can I maximize the bookings? Can I optimize the revenue? What can I do to help myself stand out? And what I found using tools like AirDNA and others, comparing myself to my peers, that I was like, even with like what I felt very little experience, outperforming 95% of the peers in the market. And I started to sort of formulate what I felt were like, key differentiators between that would help me stand out and maximize revenue. And I thought, well, A, this is not rocket science, but B, I don't really think there are a lot of people like me that are trying to, these are random people who happen to have a home in West Virginia and are just like, yeah, I'll list it on the side. I thought, and I still think there's like this arbitrage opportunity for someone to come in to be the expert operator in the space, to buy several of these cabins and to cash flow pretty significantly. And just to talk some numbers, right? These cabins are, our cabin, we paid $200K for a 4-bedroom cabin in the woods.
Okay.
So relatively cheap. The first year we started renting, this is when we were still using it, on 4th of July weekend and like popular weekends. I'm still personally using it. I think we grossed like 45K in rental revenue. And I was like, oh, this is, and so given the mortgage, like I acquired the cabin with a mortgage for maybe 40K down. So it already paid back any money that we had acquired it for. And the mortgage itself is maybe $800 a month. Right? So I saw that and was like, okay, this is crazy, right? This is me just doing it on the side. And so fast forward to today, back in the winter, so about a year ago, started reaching out to some friends saying, hey, I want to put together a small fund. I'll put some money in. You guys can all put in money and we'll seek to buy, 10, 12, 15 cabins with this and really operate them with the express purpose of maximizing revenue potential and cash flow them. And sort of the minimum target ROI on that, like cash on cash return would be like 10%, just very conservative. Currently, we're generating 30% cash on cash return. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. In fact, COVID obviously given it some bump, but we're also still, we still haven't even gone a whole year with these cabins, and there's a lot more growth there. So it's done it really well. And I think it's given me this desire to like keep growing the portfolio because I think that model is not anywhere near exhausted.
Can you cover that cash on cash return? Because I think just for clarification purposes.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is however much investor dollars we needed to acquire the property. So that's so we do get the commercial debt for all the all the properties that we buy. So that's between 65 and 75% loan to value debt. So let's say on a 200K cabin, I'm like trying to do the quick math in my head. So we're maybe putting 70K of capital down to buy. And
Right.
there's like closing costs. About half the places we bought come furnished, half of them don't. So let's say on average, we're spending 10K to furnish,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe 5K in repairs. So
Mm-hmm.
all in for our average cabin, we're probably spending 80 to 90K
Okay.
upfront.
Okay.
And when I say we're generating like 30% ROI, it's the gross revenue that we're generating minus whatever operating expenses, like the mortgage payment and electricity and all of that. That's netting out to about 30K a year. So that's the
Okay.
30K over the 90K of like total acquisition costs. And that's what I'm saying about the 30% cash on cash. And I'm literally paying that out to everybody on a quarterly basis, myself included, since I'm one of the investors.
Do you
So
factor
that's
in the management fees?
yeah, yes, yeah. So that's like
Okay.
yes. So that's that 30K is net of everything. So we're grossing like 50 to 60K on these properties, and we are we net out 25% property management fee. We net out all the other expenses, and you're left with about 25 to 30K, and that's what's driving that
That's
30%
amazing.
cash on cash.
That's
Yeah, no,
amazing.
it's done really well, very very well. And it's not tied to any one market. I don't think DC is special. B, it's not like it's just this like little pocket in West Virginia. We've got properties in Virginia. We've got properties on like the ocean. The thesis is target these sort of like secondary vacation rental markets that you don't think of them as vacation rental areas because those places are already overpriced, right? Everybody knows
Mm-hmm.
their vacations and the property values are high, but it's these random little pockets that do have significant tourism, but their economy and people don't think of them as like this is a tourism destination. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So your guests, do they come from DC area? Are they
What
from?
about DC, Baltimore, Philly? Yeah, mostly DC.
So you now have 14?
We've got 12 in the fund, or I should say 11 in the fund, plus one of my own, the original one that I purchased. And then a few other friends came after the fact and said, hey, can you just help me find a place and I'll buy it and you just operate it. So we do have some other properties that we also manage using the same infrastructure, but it's like those individuals own it. And there's pros and cons to that, right? They're not getting the diversification of the fund.
Mm-hmm.
However, the debt that you're able to get as an individual is a lot cheaper, right? And higher LTV, right? So rather than doing 65 to 75% LTV, you can get 80% LTV at 2.5, 3% rate, right? It's just crazy cheap debt. So there is a lot of value to that model as well.
Okay, so break it down for us. How do you go about identifying like what property to buy? You strictly look at cash flow?
Yeah, I mean, I rely heavily. So yeah, I guess let's talk. There's sort of like expected revenue potential, operating costs, and then obviously the cost of the asset when you buy it, the cost of the property when you buy it. On the operating upside, I really I use AirDNA as the primary source of figuring out revenue, right? So we've got national market reports across all the markets I care about, and with AirDNA, for folks who haven't used it before, you literally plug in an address. They've got this tool called Rentalizer, and
Mm-hmm.
it looks at the peer properties that are already on Airbnb and Verbo, and looks at what the historical rent has been over the last
Yeah,
couple of years, and it comes up with an expected forward-looking rent. Is
yeah,
it perfect? No, and frankly, depending on on what the comps look like, it can be sometimes really off one way or the other. But it
yeah.
gives you like a good sense. And at this point, I'm very familiar with these markets, so I get sort of adjust as normal.
So the
So
one
that
that you're
sort of gives
familiar
me,
with, what percentage of error have you seen on
yeah.
AirDNA?
I honestly, it's pretty all over the place. I
Yeah,
think that the AirDNA number that I have found tends to be lower than what we are
the
ultimately
the
performing.
actual,
Right,
yeah.
we're probably exceeding AirDNA estimates by 20%.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't tell if that's I think we just honestly are just performing above the market norms. And we could talk more about why I think that's the case,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't like to think too much down that line of reasoning because then it allows me to like be less conservative in my investment targets. And I would much rather be very conservative in what we're trying to buy and then overperform dramatically, right? So I'm trying to be pretty I don't like to think we're going to exceed what AirDNA predicts. So that's sort of revenue prediction. In
Uh-huh.
terms of so the cost to operate, most of those are pretty predictable, and it's a lot of this is like rule of thumb. I'm looking at property taxes and HOA fees. Obviously, those are property by property.
Yeah.
Um, for sort of all-in operating costs, I'm assuming, depending on the size of the property, anywhere from $450 to $600 a month, like electricity, utilities, all that crap,
Mm-hmm.
and like homeowners insurance. Obviously, the property management fee. I'm charging 25%, so that's baked in, and and then the furnishing costs, like any upfront costs,
Okay.
we know as well. So again, if the place comes furnished, it's as if there's 15 to 20K knocked off the price, right?
Yeah.
That's obviously a big benefit. But even if it's not fully furnished, at this point, there's a designer we regularly work with. Like I basically have a system down where I'm pretty confident, depending on the size of the home, that we
Mm-hmm.
can outfit this place between 10 and 15K.
Yeah.
So those are all the factors I take into account to basically come up with like an expected upfront acquisition cost
Yeah.
and an expected like operating cost ongoing to ultimately come up with like a net revenue number and an acquisition number. Does that make sense?
So when you identify a property, if it makes sense for you to buy into your portfolio or not, do you strictly look at numbers? I mean, what else do you look at? Locations,
Yeah. So
age of the
and this goes
homes?
maybe back to the last point around
Yeah.
which like around property, like the price and I guess what I look for ultimately. So the price drives a lot of this, right? And it really is. I take a very quantitative approach to what we're acquiring, and some basic rules of thumb. Like in our markets that we target, we're typically looking at a minimum of like 40 to 45K of gross rent,
Mm-hmm.
but almost never more than like 60K of gross rent. And
Okay.
so with that band and given like that 30% cash on cash target, it's
Mm-hmm.
really, we're almost never going to pay more than 200K for a property. And in fact, I try to stick in a sweet spot more closer to like 150K. And so that's just boxing you in to some pretty tight geographies in certain
Yeah.
areas that you're looking. So that's sort of, again, that's like the quantitative approach. In terms of and for what it's worth, just granted I've got a limited portfolio here, but our lower priced properties are definitely overperforming versus the ones where we paid a little bit more for them. There's a couple of properties we purchased that are like 220 to 240, and those, just given the extra upfront cost to acquire, we're not able to offset that in added rent.
Because you got
Like it's
the
not enough to offset.
yeah, higher upfront costs and you also got higher debt too.
Higher debt, I mean, there's a higher property management fee, or actually not higher property management fee, but higher like utilities. It's just higher everything, higher property taxes. So
Yeah.
it definitely generates more rent, but it's not enough rent to justify the higher price. So that's been like a general rule of thumb. But apart from that, I mean, I don't like to buy places that are going to have a ton of like rehab that needs to get done, or
Okay.
a ton of delayed maintenance. I'm trying to think of other rules of thumb. In general, like I found that places that have access to water, and not on the water because you're paying a premium for that, but
Right.
just access to water, that's a nice sweet spot for us because you're not paying the premium up front, but the guests, when they're booking, like they want to play, especially in the summer, to like go play in the water, do boat stuff, whatever. I don't know. It's not. Yeah, I guess my overall conclusion to this is it's primarily spreadsheet driven with like a gut check on, does this place look like a place you would want to stay at yourself, or could you make it look like a place?
Yeah.
And are there amenities that are going to attract someone who wants to go away for the weekend, right? And
Yeah.
that's going to be either water access or some like hiking access, something that's going to attract somebody. If it doesn't have those things, it's tough, I think, to justify.
So earlier you mentioned all the things that you on the don't list that you did, like bad photos, all of that. Do you still do
Sure.
those, or do you have professional photographer now?
Yeah, so I got a professional photographer, so we always do professional photos, and
Yeah.
that's like the money best spent, right?
Yeah.
It's, I think,
Yeah.
maybe 300 to 400 bucks, $500 for a huge place, and I'm convinced it pays for itself many times over. So that's one. I hire a designer whenever we don't have a place that's furnished. I hire a designer to design and pick all the furniture and the decor, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that really probably 40% of our places we've done that with,
Mm-hmm.
and we, I think, do really well as a result. In the early days, like our first couple ones, I feel like we did a bunch of iterations on like ordering things. We would miss stuff. So like I realized we would go to list the property, and then we wouldn't have like, I'm trying to think of an example, like oven mitts, or we wouldn't have like spatulas. Like it would just be
Yeah,
random
yeah, yeah.
stuff, and it just
Yeah.
felt like it was this constant like rigmarole. Whereas now it's like everything is just like everything's checklists, right? It's like checklists, everything we need to do up front when we buy something, checklists of all the supplies, check like we got our process, we ship stuff to like a storage facility, and we've got the cleaners will show up and they'll bring it, they'll set it. It's just everything is just a system at this point. And I feel like we've got a lot of the kinks out that just caused me a lot of stress. And frankly, my first couple of properties, I felt like your first babies. Like I was there on site, and I was really
Mhm.
nervous. Like,
Yeah,
is this
yeah,
the right
yeah.
one to buy? Whereas the last 6 or 7, I've still never visited the properties. Like they're only a couple hours away, but it just works. I don't need to be there. So I've got very comfortable very quickly doing this sight unseen. And I'm starting to look more nationally as a result, because again, I'm not actually there. It doesn't really
Right.
make a difference. So it's been a very quick evolution of my own thinking, I think, in what success looks like.
Okay, so do you still answering the guest inquiry? Because, we have the number side of the business, and then we also have the
Yeah.
day-to-day operations. Where are you in that?
Yeah. So the short answer is no, thank the Lord. I'm not doing that. But there was a period, and my wife can tell you all about it, where I was like, I'll maybe just I guess go on a little bit of a riff here. When we had just our one cabin,
Uh-huh.
like I was managing all of that, right? Like
Yeah.
guests would reach out, and I kind of liked it, right? I liked being that guy who was like
Yeah.
talking to the guests and like answering their questions. It was kind of fun. As soon as we had a couple of cabins, it wasn't just the guest communication. We had like everything going at once. We're like trying to acquire basically a new property every three
Uh-huh.
weeks. So we've got
Uh-huh.
the acquisition stuff. We've got the setup teams who are like trying to put together furniture, and like we're trying to order all the stuff. And then
Uh-huh.
we've got the guest communication, and then the cleaner communication as well, and the handyman. And it became this nightmare project management that I was largely doing myself. And that, I would say, in like August and September came to a head, and I was just losing my mind. Fortunately, through Contactually, we had an offshore team running our support in the Philippines that I had hired and put together over the years. And our head of support, Penny, she lives in like Greater Manila. I've worked with her for 9 years, and she's amazing. She's like super on top of everything, and
Mhm.
she was interested and willing to sort of take on this new project with me. So she's like my operations manager now, and we've also got a team of folks, some of whom came from Contactually, some of whom were just new, who are our support or like guest communication support team. And they're managing all the guest communication, cleaner communication, coordinating with the handyman, and Penny's kind of playing, air traffic control, making
Mhm.
sure it all works. So I largely can be as engaged or disengaged as I want at this point, and I really am relying heavily on Penny to be that manager. Even though, ironically, she obviously has never seen these properties and never will, because she's in Manila. But it's worked. It's worked fine. Like I was nervous about the idea of having the offshore team do this, but it's actually worked really well.
So how long has it been, Tony, since you acquired your first, I mean, not your cabin, that doesn't count. How long has it been?
Since May, it's just been very,
Since
very new.
May.
Yeah.
And you
Uh,
were able to put that whole system together.
yeah, like yes, and it was stressful for for a couple months, but yes, since May.
That's
I can't. I
outstanding.
mean,
It's like a
what's that?
miracle. I said it's a miracle.
I don't know. It's a miracle. I have a history of biting off way more than I can chew, because I think to myself, oh yeah, it's not so bad. Like it's just, you can just do this. And I ultimately, it worked fine. It has worked fine. But man, it was rough. It was a rough couple months.
I think
But
that's all entrepreneurs are like that, or business owners, and most of them are like that, right? They just want to do more than they can actually.
I think so. And I'm thankfully, I think I've recognized this after this last year, and I'm starting to think about, future, more funds and building a bigger portfolio. But I currently am planning to take it slower. I'm planning to buy a few more cabins myself, maybe add one every few months, but I'm not this one every 3 weeks thing, with no team. Like that was just insane.
So where do you see yourself going with this? How big do you want to grow this new venture?
Yeah, I mean that's the $1 million question, to be honest.
Yeah.
The really nice thing about I guess where we've been is the investors who are partnered with me on this first fund, I would say universally are very pleased with their returns and would want to put more money in should I want to do it, right? I would have no trouble raising more capital, but it is like a big operational challenge. It is a big operational lift, right? And I was originally thinking, we've got, let's say a dozen properties now. Why not raise another fund to do 50 properties? Why not
Mhm.
do 100 properties? Like there's really, it's a kind of rinse and repeat. It's just scaling. But I think I'm kidding myself of the ease of doing that operationally. And I frankly I don't know if I want to take on that stress. So my current plan is take the next 3 to 6 months, buy a few properties myself,
Mhm.
use the same infrastructure that's already there now, right? Just buy,
Mhm.
but just using my money.
Yeah, yeah. Without the fund, just for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yep,
Yeah.
just myself. And reevaluate, right? Like I think probably I will opportunistically still buy things for the foreseeable future and
Hmm.
put together small, whether they're an actual fund or not, but like, other friends' money, we just buy stuff together. I think that's very appealing. But I don't plan to double down on like a much bigger fund too at the moment. Because just it's there's a reason why not a lot of people have formed these kinds of funds. I think they're very successful financially, but they take a
Hmm.
huge toll on the operator, which I'm not. Yeah, it's just been hard. That's all.
So obviously you're a system and process guy.
I am. That's
Sounds
right.
like it. What are the tools that you use in your business?
Yeah, I
Please don't
so
say
Google.
spreadsheet. I'm
Well, as I
joking.
say, so Google Sheets is like my best friend, and probably Penny's like nightmare because I try to do everything in Google Sheets. I mean, to be honest, I do use Google Sheets for a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual like property management, guest management, so we migrated to Guesty as our PMS,
Okay.
and that's worked great. I mean, I was looking for an all-in-one that had enough flexibility and enough complexity that could serve like 95% of our needs, but it wouldn't be like I guess in the CRM world, I would equate like Streamline to like Salesforce.com. It's like
Yeah.
it's got everything, but you're paying a lot, and it's like kind of this clunky, bloated piece of software. I didn't feel like I needed that, so I spent a lot of time with a lot of pieces of software, and I was very happy with Guesty. We also use, because again I got the remote team doing all the guest communication,
Right.
all the written like stuff through Airbnb and the other
Mhm.
platforms that goes through Guesty, but we do all of our texting and calls via text line and Ring Central.
Mhm.
So we've got like one central number that routes all the calls and all the texts, so the team can pick up and manage those tickets, and that's gone pretty well. No, it took a little while to figure that out. This is like a total rabbit hole extreme, but with Airbnb, where a lot of our bookings come from,
Yeah.
um, you can't use a virtual number in
Right.
Airbnb. They will not allow you to add it. And so
Right.
we went through this like whole rigmarole process to like we have an actual Comcast number
Yeah.
that we had to add it in Airbnb, and then
Yeah.
once it was added, then we could like switch it to a virtual number. It was like this, so
Oh.
that's what we ultimately did to be able to allow the team to use text line and whatnot. But that's been great now that it's set up. But apart from that, we were using Turnover BNB for a while to like manage the cleaners and the cleaner communication and cleaner
Mhm.
payments. Ultimately, I sunsetted that and just rolled it into Guesty. Guesty had
Yeah.
enough functionality to do that. We were paying for Price Labs for a while to do like the revenue optimization, determine how
Yeah.
we should price. But in our markets, they were the only ones who could operate there, like beyond pricing, and others couldn't. They didn't have.
Yeah.
They don't function there. And it wasn't. I felt it was just really unsophisticated and limited. Like the recommendations were lower than what I could price and still maintain like 95% occupancy. So I ultimately just scrapped it and tried to rebuild it all on Guesty. So yeah, I guess this is like a commercial for Guesty because I'm using like Guesty for everything at this point, and it's like it's at least good enough for everything that I need.
You just touched on something. I just want to briefly cover it. Occupancy. What rate do you try to achieve?
Yeah. So you and I obviously have spoken about this with our mastermind group a fair amount. My number one objective, given that I am the owner, or at least partial owner in all these properties,
Yeah.
is to make as much money as possible from
Right.
them. right? And so my belief is that the prices should be set very high far in advance. And
Mm-hmm.
if people are willing to book far in advance and pay 2x, 3x what I would charge if it was a week out, great. I'll take that all day long. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I do.
Yeah.
So just to talk again, just brass tacks on a property, a 3 bedroom with a nice view. If it's 3 months out, we'll set that at like $600 a night on the weekend,
Okay.
$700 a night. So we'll set it aggressive. Um, and then if it's like a month out and it still's not booked, I'll drop that to like maybe 500. And then if it's 2 weeks out, I'll drop that to like 300. If it's
Yeah.
a week out, I'll drop it to like 150. And if it's days out, I'll drop it to like $50. And if it's an orphan night within a couple weeks, I'll drop it to, between 50 and $100. So I'm dramatically bringing the price down as the date gets closer with the objective to ensure that no night goes through that's not booked. Our occupancy is probably around in January. I think it's at 98 and a half, 99%. Most months it's always above 95%. And I'm forcing it that way with the pricing. I think there's an argument to be made that maybe if I just held out and kept prices higher, that would offset the like even if I had 80% occupancy, that'd be better. But I don't think that math makes sense, right? I'm already pricing super aggressively
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah.
And let's say I kept the prices no less than 200,
Mm-hmm.
every night that's not booked, I would have to have a double the price point, right? To offset it.
Right.
You have to have you have that extra night somewhere. And so I don't believe that I could achieve it. So I think I'm following the right strategy, but anyway, that's what I've been doing so far.
You are all kinds of impressive. Like we can go on and on for like hours, you know?
Well, I don't know about that. I think I feel I have strong convictions loosely held, right? Like I feel like I understand something and I'm executing against it, but I don't know. Take it for what it's worth. I would love for anyone listening to call me out on whether they feel like this doesn't make sense because I'm constantly in learning mode.
Yeah, both encourage people to comment or contact us and let us know if they have any questions or yeah, call you out. If I don't think, there's anything to be called out, but we all have different opinions. So how do you continue to stay on top of the trends, look ahead and whatnot in your position?
Yeah, I think I said this before. It's not rocket science. Maybe that's arrogant of me, but I've got a dozen properties, right? It's not a huge world. I've got to know my markets very well. So I mean, just speaking hyper tactically within those markets, I try to stay on top of like what are festivals that are going on, what are things that are going to drive the bookings. So that's like
Mhm,
just very tactical stuff.
mhm,
I'm constantly trying to iterate with new ways to like have a good guest experience. So we started like we give little bonuses to our cleaners now for like good cleaner reviews, like guest reviews. We like ask guests if there's anything special we can do for them, and guests have asked us to like leave flowers for birthdays, like do handwritten notes, and like I'll have the cleaners do that. And I think constantly trying to just like tweak things that I think will drive more bookings or maybe create better guest reviews, which will hopefully drive greater bookings. So that's just very hyper tactical. In terms of like industry stuff that maybe influences my investment thinking or like what properties we buy. There's a bunch of newsletters that I subscribe to. I'm trying to think of like, so I think Stessa, I think it's how you say it. They're like a tax or revenue management. I don't use their product, but they had
oh,
provide a really good newsletter.
Stessa or
Yeah,
Stessa?
Stessa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They do a good newsletter every week that sort of covers a lot of what's happening in the residential real estate industry, which I find like interesting trends around property values and rents. I think Evolve and Vacasa both have some really good. They're big property managers, right? They have
Right.
good content that I subscribe to. Prop Moto is another one that's like property tech,
Mm-hmm.
property management tech. They have like trends in the industry. And to be honest, I just get a bunch of these newsletters, other names of which that I don't even remember, that I think are just, I find they're insightful, right? They link to things that I think force me to think a little differently about the industry. And of course, through our mastermind group,
Mm-hmm.
and has been helpful just to kind of hear from other property managers. Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm coming at this from like out of left field. Right? I don't have any experience in this industry, and so I'm doing what I think feels reasonable. But I like to like pressure test that against people who have been doing it for a while. And relatedly, I've never been shy about just cold reaching out to people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I'm pretty good at it. Like my it's not again not rocket science, but I just not bashful at all about saying, hey, I see what XYZ that you're doing, and I think it's really impressive. here's what I'm doing. I'd love to learn and see if we can help each other. Are you free next Wednesday at 10 a.m.? And I don't know what the response rate, but maybe it's 30-40% from cold emails. Like it works well. So I do that all the time. I reach out to people all the time and just pick their brain.
That's great. All right. So as we wrapping up, I'm going to ask you some questions that I asked all the guests that I invited on the
Sure,
show.
sure.
What is the one thing that people might be surprised to know about you?
Surprised to know about me. I don't know. I mean, like, I guess I'll give two answers to this. One, given the focus of this conversation, I think people who I've worked with or who know me, they think of me as kind of this like analytical, like kind of intense numbers guy, which, no doubt I am. Like I'm nerd. I like to nerd out that kind of stuff. But like honestly, what I really miss about my time at Contactually and the team is like I love just like going out for drinks and coffee and lunches. It's just like getting to know people really well and really intimately. And it's with COVID, I think it's been especially difficult and hard with that. That curiosity that I talked about before of like liking to learn new things, like that applies, I think, to people as well. Like I really like to know about what makes people tick. Like what are they passionate about? What do they dream about? Like what are they scared about? Like I love having those what I would call more intimate, real conversations with people. And those are frankly the relationships and friendships that I value the most, people who are willing to be vulnerable with me and I with them. So maybe that's what's, I think my veneer or demeanor comes across as sort of like cold and calculating, but in my practice with people I get in one-on-one and relationships, it's pretty different and much more like emotional, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, when I call you and ask you a question about the funds, you were very upfront, very open with me.
Yeah,
I
I think
appreciate
that
that.
harkens back to like this, maybe like the startup world. Like in tech, people are very candid and it's very like flat, right? There's no like this idea of hierarchy or like guarded secrets just doesn't exist. So everything I've just shared is I'm an open book with that type of stuff, and as you shared or said, and that comes from a place I think of like I think execution trumps information 99 times out of 100, right?
Agree.
Everything I've just said, it's like it's not all that valuable unless you're able to put it into practice, and I think that's where it gets really hard. So I'm
Well,
always willing to share.
I think everything you share so far is really valuable.
Thanks.
Do you have time for hobbies? And what's your
Time for
favorite
hobbies.
hobby?
Yeah, I mean, a couple. Yes, short answer. I run a lot, so I like run every day. I like to hike a lot as well. So yesterday, I'm trying to do this every like 3 or 4 weeks. Is I take like half the day off and I just might just go with my dog and we went for like a 9-mile hike in Shenandoah National Park, and it's just nice, like just a couple-hour hike, just getting away. I'll put in some podcasts or ebooks and go for it. I'm a really big like craft beer guy. So
Okay.
like my wife and I both like really nerd out on good beer and wine. And so yeah, so that's like random things that I'm into. And yeah, I don't know. I'm like again, like this is a broken record, but I'm like a curious person. Like I'm constantly reading or listening to something different. Right now, listening to an audiobook on like the history of information and like how the history of like oral like communication, and like when we first started writing things down. If you think about it, I just read this yesterday. I thought it was so profound. Like the idea that we read books today and we think of things in words, like that didn't exist until like printing and writing became a thing. The idea of like the words that we're using now, that you would visualize them as actual words, like that didn't exist at some point previously.
Right,
And like I
right.
just never thought about that before. It's a novel thought. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, those are some of the
You're
things I'm
getting deep
into.
on us here.
Exactly.
Talking about long book, I'm still listening to this book I started a few months ago about Jim Baker.
I don't know Jim Baker. Should I?
Well, the title is The Man Who Built America, or The Man Who Runs America. He served as the chief of staff for Ronald Reagan, and I
Oh, cool.
believe also for Bush. So pretty interesting story, a little history, because I didn't come from here, so it educated me. Yeah. So last questions. How does the audience get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, like I said, I'm an open book, and I'm happy to like chat anytime. The folks who shoot me an email, it's just Tony at bluemaple.co, not .com, .co. That's like the investment thing. If you want to check out our properties, it's just dcgetaway.com. And yeah, feel free. My last name, there are only like a handful of Capperts in the world. So if you just type my name, you'll find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, that's all for today's episode of the Real Estate Ballers Show. Thanks for watching, and thanks, Tony, for joining me today. Please don't forget to visit our website at REBallers.com to learn more about us. If you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a thumb up, or if you simply tell a friend about us, that would help too. And please don't forget to leave a comment to let us know what you learned, what you not learned. Lastly, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss another show.